A Manhattan federal judge today just made a major ruling in the Luigi Mangione case. Here with more is the Hill's courts and legal reporter Zach Schoenfeld. Zach, what happened in court today?
Hey, Judy, a major development here in this case of Luigi Mangione, with the federal judge ruling that he will not face the death penalty. Luigi Mangione's lawyers have been arguing for months that federal prosecutors, the Trump administration, should not be allowed to execute him. They argue that the allegations and the charges in these cases do not meet the legal requirements for execution. And now, this federal judge in New York City, who was assigned to the case, U.S. District Judge Margaret Garnett, who's an appointee of former President Biden, she has come out in favor of Mangione's arguments. Judy, I'm just going to read you a little bit here from the ruling. But before I do, just to set up the context for what is the legal basis here, this really all came down to, can the charges in this case be considered what the legal term is called a crime of violence? That is what the Justice Department relied on. They had to show, they were alleging that Luigi Mangione was stalking the United Healthcare CEO, and they had to show that those stalking allegations were a crime of violence in order to not only convict, but to execute Luigi Mangione. The judge is rejecting that, but she's acknowledging that when you think about this case and these allegations, in her words, she said it might even seem a bit absurd. But I'll just read you here from her ruling, really going after the Supreme Court. She says that regardless of her own views, that, quote, a district court is duty bound to follow binding Supreme Court precedent. The analysis contained in the balance of this opinion may strike the average person, and indeed many lawyers and judges, as tortured and strange, and the result may seem contrary to our intuitions about the criminal law. But the judge went on to say that it represents her committed effort to faithfully apply the dictates of the Supreme Court to the charges in this case. Obviously, Judy, when you think about the accusation here that Luigi Mangione gunned down the United Healthcare CEO outside that Midtown Manhattan hotel in December of 2024, as the judge is saying here, it might strike the average person as saying, yeah, that's a crime of violence, but at least under the Supreme Court's legal definition, it does not. And as a result, it means that Luigi Mangione will not be facing the death penalty.
Zach, would you say this is a major loss for prosecutors?
It is a major loss for prosecutors. This has been one of the biggest battlefronts that we've really seen come up, at least in the federal prosecution here, in his case here ahead of trial. He's got some other arguments as well, but this has been one of the big things. Luigi Mangione, he faces 3 different sets of criminal charges. He faces state charges in Pennsylvania, where he was arrested at that McDonald's. He faces state charges in New York, where this incident actually happened, of course. And then this federal case, unlike those state cases, was the only one where he would have been eligible to face the death penalty. So today's ruling means that not only is he not going to face the death penalty in his federal case, it means that he is not going to face the death penalty, period, full stop, because his other cases, don't have the death penalty as an option. So at least from that standpoint, and as you look broadly to this whole prosecution, not even just the federal case, but what the states are doing too, this is a major loss for those prosecutors.
The judge also making a major ruling related to evidence in Mangione's case. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this is another ruling that came down just alongside the one we were talking about the death penalty. And this all relates to the search of Mangione's backpack. When officers had seized and searched it after arresting him at that McDonald's, you're seeing the images on your screen of some of the materials that they obtained from that McDonald's and from the backpack at the time. And Mangione, in these cases, has been arguing that all this evidence that you're seeing right now on your screen, some of these notes, his driver's license, things like that. Of course, some of these indictments say that he gave a fake ID to officers. They're saying that none of that can be shown to the jury, which of course would be a massive deal in terms of whether he is convicted or found not guilty, because really this evidence could make or break the case. And so that's why you see cases like this oftentimes being decided in these pretrial motions. But on this one, Judy, the federal judge coming out in favor of the Justice Department, siding against Mangione and saying that this evidence can be introduced at trial. So one big win for Mangione today, but also a big loss for him as well.
Zach, yesterday a Minnesota man was arrested after attempting to impersonate an FBI agent and release Mangione. Can you give us more details on that?
Yeah, quite a bizarre incident here, Judy, that we've been learning of this week, with a new criminal complaint filed that says that this Minnesota man had showed up to the Metropolitan Detention Center, this facility in Brooklyn, which is the typical place for federal defendants in New York City to be housed while they await trial, like Mangione. According to these charging documents, he showed up at this Brooklyn facility on Wednesday night and had claimed that he was an FBI agent with paperwork signed by a judge to release an inmate, and he was asking the officials at that jail to allow him to do so. Now, the court documents that have been filed against this, accusing him of impersonating an FBI agent, they don't mention Luigi Mangione by name. But Judy, I did speak to a law enforcement source who did confirm to me that indeed the inmate in question here was Luigi Mangione. Now, there is nothing to suggest that Mangione or his team even knows who this person is or has any connection to him. And at least so far, Mangione's team has been declining to comment. So they're not saying much about this. But still, Judy, quite a bizarre incident over at the MDC this week.
Bizarre for sure. Going back to Mangione, what's next in the case against him?
Well, he still now has this federal case in front of him. He might not be facing the death penalty, but the case is still moving ahead on 2 of those charges. And if convicted on those 2 charges, he could face up to life in prison without parole. That would be the maximum punishment. So make no mistake, this case is by no means over. We're still many months away from those trials taking place. These trials, both in his federal case as well as the state cases, we're likely talking about, not until late this year or even next year or later. So that's still a ways away, but still here, a big milestone in the pretrial proceedings here in this federal case. But still, this case still going to a jury at some point, it seems, as of now.
Zach Schoenfeld, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.